Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how best writers risk being strange. And I got a writer here who is also an editor. Adam Petrash has edited 2 anthologies, Parallel Prairies and most recently Alternate Planes, and is the editor as well of the forthcoming Dead Work by the Dead Work Collective, which we're doing a Kickstarter for right now. If you're listening to this when the Kickstarter is on and you go to deadwork.ca, that'll take you right to the Kickstarter, deadwork.ca. If you're listening to this later when the Kickstarter is off, deadwork.ca will still take you to wherever you can get the Dead Work Anthology. So Adam, I was thinking a little bit about kind of the origins of this project. I remember we were all hanging out in Lyndon's backyard. Not all of us, but a bunch of us were hanging out in his backyard. And my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory is that you actually are the one who came up with the name Dead Work. Was it you or Chris? I couldn't remember.
I believe it was Chris. I'm not going to take credit for that. I made the suggestion that the group should be a collective.
Sure, that was it.
And then that was the part that but I believe, it was Chris Smith who came up with the Dead Work.
Okay, that's where I was melding the two and having a hard time remembering who did what. So then maybe you could talk a little bit about, why don't we just start with talking a little bit about that name and sort of why we kind of settled on that name and why maybe you suggested the whole collective side of it.
Well, at the meeting, I would say that I was mainly a observer and a listener, and just hearing everybody talk, that I believe it was Zach who was like, everyone has this work. It's all finished and it's kind of hard, like it's shorter work, right? So it's kind of harder to find homes for a 1-page or a 4-page. And everyone had worked together with everyone else. And I believe everyone's like, yeah, it's just work that's dead. It's not selling, there's no homes for it. And I think that's where Chris said, it's dead work. And that's where it clicked, where, okay, everything should be compiled and we should call it Dead Work. Just call it what it is. The collective part kind of came from that everyone has a voice. Everyone owns their own creative IP. There's no hierarchy in the system. Everybody gets a vote and just seem to work the most organically and natural that way. That benefits everyone as creators.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, because it isn't like a situation where we're all throwing something in a pot and now some company called Dead Work owns it. It's we're all kind of individually working together, but are kind of doing our own separate things. Although we started to kind of crossbreed in a manner of speaking and do stuff with one another quite quick, which we were already kind of doing. That was sort of where it all kind of came out of, just noticing that we all kind of tend to work with one another in different ways. What I thought was kind of interesting about the Dead Work idea too, to me. So as you say, a lot of this stuff is, just short, and therefore there's not a lot of, venues for real short pieces. But the other sort of side of the quote unquote, Dead Work of it is a lot of times what you'll do in comics in particular is you'll create a 6-page, short or an 8-page short or something that maybe stands on its own and kind of operates like a short story, but also is actually intended to be part of a pitch package to try to get a series picked up or a graphic novel picked up or something like this. This is just something people do in comics, which doesn't really happen so much in the literary world that you and I maybe are more familiar with, where you got in that world, if you want to write a novel, you finish the novel and then you try to sell the novel. Whereas in comics, because the art costs so much, people will tend to do these 6 pages or 8 pages or something where they have kind of a beginning, middle, and end, and they work by themselves, but they also sort of represent almost like a proof of concept for a larger work, whether that's a graphic novel or a mini series or whatever. And so in that sense, what I think is kind of cool about the Dead Work anthology is that you've got these self-contained pieces, and so it reads like a sort of normal anthology, but also it's kind of represents a lot of stuff that is intended to sort of become something later on. It's kind of in this limbo more than being dead, because it's sort of in the pitch process. And so what I think is kind of cool about it, like if I was a reader picking it up, I would think what's kind of is, I think, going to be interesting about it maybe 5-10 years down the line is hopefully and ideally it's going to represent the first appearances of a lot of these characters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you nailed it there. That like if you take something like She-Wolf, which is a good standalone, but it's also a proof of concept that is, the idea is to make it a larger project down the road. Or if you look at like Dirk Dirksen, right? Meant to be a larger project down the road. And what this is really doing is just, it's like a tasting platter of like giving you these little samples of like what's to come. So Dead, not really, but a taste of things to come for sure.
The Dead part has always become a bit of a misnomer, because this project has kind of given everything a new life, that or kind of like pulled into its orbit, things that kind of are still just in their infancy.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it's a cool title and it kind of works still.
Yes, I think it served its purpose when it was created, and it's just kind of stuck.
Do you think when you were looking at all these pieces, because you're serving as the editor on this, and so one of your jobs was, well, maybe you can just talk a little bit about like what that meant for this project and kind of what you did, and just sort of how you've been part of this collective and part of this project a little bit.
Sure. So depending on the comic, and going back to the name Dead Work, a lot of these comics were already finished, right? So I could come in at either two levels, where it's the script level and I'm looking at, substantive edits or structural edits, or I come in when the pages are complete and I'm like proofing and just making sure grammar is correct, like sentences make sense, all of that. So most of this was that latter where most of the pages were finished. So what I ended up having to do is everyone submitted to me everything that they wanted to like have for consideration to be included. And I picked the best pieces and worked on the layout. So more than anything with these finished pages, it was what's the pacing going to look like? Because we have no cover pages, like how is one going to bleed into the next, and make sure that they're not bleeding in a way that you can't tell where one comic ends and one comic starts. So I really like played with color to just visually indicate breaks and things like that. And then there was this stuff of like looking at copy editing and grammar and things like that. And yeah, that's basically my contribution to the project.
Yeah, and so one thing I think that's one thing that I think is kind of interesting and maybe worth noting for people if they didn't quite already figure it out from what you just said is like, we had originally kind of as a group given you a bunch of stuff and you had selected some of it. So like there's some stuff that kind of, for whatever reason didn't make it in here. So we kind of wanted, on one level, you're kind of acted like a quality control filter in that way, like as opposed to just like what everyone's like stuff they can't place for whatever reason is like, well, some of that, let's just whittle that down to like what's the best, cool, awesome stuff that maybe doesn't place, or that like doesn't have its exposure elsewhere. Like I remember one of the things that me and Gregory had sent you was a short that didn't make it in because of course it's also kind of in this. It ended up being kind of the thing we had done that was also in the heavy metal series that we're doing. So
sure.
Why replicate that? But like, so one thing, but we, as a group, I think we were really like cognizant of like, on one hand, we want to do this and do it ourselves. But on the other hand, like we need like someone to be like saying yes or no to things and having like a quality control level of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then as you say, also like I never really thought about it myself, but of course, like you bring up a great point, which is that because so many of the artists in here are working on multiple pieces, And because a lot of this stuff doesn't have like a title page, or even, sometimes the title's at the end, like in She-Wolf, the title is like at the very end of it.
Yep.
So it really kind of, it could easily be a situation where it's maybe confusing what follows what, like, like when one thing begins and ends, like if the same artist is being represented, or the same color scheme, even, as you say. I never thought
Yeah.
about that till you kind of mentioned it, and it makes perfect sense. When I read through it for the first time, like front to back, I was really impressed with that flow and kind of how it felt well paced, and it felt like there was no confusion, and it was like changing it up a lot, but still had a consistency.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, because I spent a lot of effort on the arrangement of the table of contents. And like the other thing too that I didn't mention earlier was like I did my best to balance when the creators appeared within the book. So you don't have, oh, this is all Zach Schuster. Oh, this is all Jonathan Ball. This is all Gregory Kmichuk, right? Balancing it throughout so that it gives that variety rather than just like these chunks of individual artists.
So what are some of the things you considered? So you considered like varying the pace, as you say, and kind of varying who is appearing when, and so on. What are some of the sort of things that went into that? Like, other than just the calculus of it, like what's the sort of more abstract things you were trying to, keep in mind when you were doing that?
More abstract. So rather than just like actual pacing and like the color.
Well, rather than just like, Zach followed by Greg, or like how many pages.
It all came down to how stories started and how stories finished. And then part of that plays into just like how the storyteller is telling the story, and how does that ease into another story, or should it be an abrupt ending and then a soft beginning, but I guess that would be the most abstract. Like, I guess I would almost want to say feel. I know that's going to sound really odd, but when you like, do you know when you used to make mixtapes?
Yeah.
Not to date myself, right? But like when you had like, you're mixing the songs, right? And you're like, oh, this song ends and this song comes into it, and that's like the perfect segue into like this next song, right? And like that kind of structure is kind of the mindset I brought to doing this anthology, because I loved making mixtapes as a kid.
That's really interesting comparison, because so often, of course, when you made a mixtape, you'd make it like for somebody, right?
Yeah.
You make it for yourself when you're in a certain mood, or you like, oh, well, this will be my night mixtape, right? Or this will be my walk-in, at night mixtape, or this will be like the one for, Sarah or whatever. Like, you'd have like this audience in mind, or this time or mood in mind. And then you'd kind of like really, think through those transitions, as you say. Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about that, but it is a really interesting point of comparison for sequencing a collection. Even a collection of me putting a short story collection together, I could even see like where I've maybe done stuff like when I was used to make mixtapes. It's really because I'm always thinking about the audience and how they're going to receive this after that, and is it going to like floor them, or give them a false sense of security before this other thing gets, these drums come in, or whatever.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So yeah, I really applied that. And also like we're dealing with genre where we have horror and fantasy and sci-fi. So I tried to balance that too based on genre. And I mean, the anthology is a lot of fun, but like first and foremost, like, cause the plan for a lot of these creators is to sell them at conventions, right? Is you can immediately pick up this book, fan through it, know that comic is from one artist, this comic's from another artist, and immediately tell whether or not you like it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because I like in doing this anthology, I researched a lot of anthologies, and like I picked some of them up because I'm a very tactile person. And like when you flip through them, it's like, oh, the story's bland. Whereas like this artist is too similar to that artist. And like what I really love about this anthology is we have very distinct artist styles. So you can tell who is who. And I think that is a huge plus.
Yeah, it's a good point. It almost kind of was accidental, I guess, in some ways, but it really is like the artists in there really have completely distinct styles. Like they're not even really working in the same realms. It's not like you got two people doing Marvel method, like Marvel style superheroes. It's just totally distinct. And so even though you've got a lot of the same artists, appearing multiple times, you don't really have it doesn't feel like it almost feels like more artists that there is. You know what I mean? Because of how they're doing different things. They're also like a lot of stuff's over a long time period. So you'll see an early Zach and a late Zach, which you can tell the same person, but it kind of has a different feel.
Yeah, it's evolved, right? All of them have gone, they just keep getting better, right?
I think in particular, like the artists, it's harder to judge writers, I find, than the artists. But I feel like especially the artists have really a lot of them have clicked into a lot of them more recently have clicked into like a really quick advancement in their skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Because there's just that point, you always hit that tipping point at some point, right? I think a lot of them have kind of hit that tipping point in the last few years.
Well, I think what's happened is that a lot of them are they're putting in way more hours into their art. And of course, the more hours you put in, you're going to improve if you're doing, the work.
Yeah. And you get that moment of kind of almost exponential improvement. So I think it almost accidentally is the happy accident in the sense that I feel like the anthology is kind of coming around at a good time in that sense, The other thing I think is just one thing I'm just kind of curious to know though from you, as looking at other anthologies and so on. So you're doing this coming pretty quick off a maybe I'm screwing my timeline up because the pandemic has got me so time dumb, but you're coming off this prose fiction anthology, Alternate Planes, that you'd done, which was the follow-up to the Parallel Prairies anthology that you co-edited, both those anthologies with Darren Ridgely. And I'm curious to know how the process for kind of sequencing or putting together the arrangement in this Dead Work comics thing. How is a comics anthology and working on this thing different from working with those prose works?
Good question. So I would say that there's a lot of similarities, but with the comic work, illustrations play a huge part, whereas with prose, you're looking at finding holes is the best way to put it. It's going to sound funny, but I kind of look at short stories the way I would look at contracts or reading contracts and how does this make sense? Does it follow the plot and the structure and etc.? Whereas with comic art, when I get the finished page, it's different if I'm in on the script and I'm like, hey, this doesn't really make sense. Maybe this should be rearranged, or I'm looking at thumbnails and being pacing's a little off here. But with the Dead Work, as most of it was completed, I think there was maybe 3 or 4 comics that were created for the anthology, but everything else was finished. Looking at the approach of what I had discussed earlier with you, with the pacing and the balance and judging based on illustrations. With the prose, it's the same for his balance. It's I would say, like I said, with mixtapes, but also tastes, right? So maybe if a story was a little more grim and dark, I'd pair it next to a more lighter story to even out that balance, where as in the Dead Work Anthology, there is a lot of grim and dark, and it's grim and dark, that could be followed up by some more grim and dark, and you know what, maybe a little bit more grim and dark. So I would say they were similar but different. They're the same things but different. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. You mentioned before, when I kind of read the whole thing, what struck me about it is, although there is a lot of stuff that's grim and dark, I think as a whole, there's a real revelment, if that makes sense. It's a real sense of fun and playing around in a lot of these pieces. Even the more grim and dark ones, some of them when I think of my own She-Wolf, even though it's grim and dark, she's having fun. You know what I mean? Like there's this level at which I think there's real engagement for a lot of the artists, especially um, where like they're just trying different weird fun things, doing weird formal structures sometimes, like in that Tomorrow's Escape story that Lyndon and Stephen did. There's a real like kind of unusual story structure that they're kind of
Yeah.
having fun with, you know. And then of course some of them are just like lighthearted fun comics. But then I find even with the ones that are more grim and dark, I think like have like just a sense of like I don't know what the word would be, but almost like an enjoyment in them. Like either the characters are enjoying something about that grim situation, or like you can just feel like the artist is enjoying this, you know, on a certain level.
I would agree. I think that when creators enjoy what they're doing, it comes through in their art and it comes through in their writing. And you really see that with this anthology because, as you said, it's grim and dark, but a lot of it is fun. Like if you look at Dirk Dirksen, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of humor in that story.
Yeah, you know, to me,
Right?
I wrote Dirk Dirk's is an interesting piece in and of itself, which, but just because like knowing the history of that thing, like when I was doing my PhD, um, I had like a gap of like I think it was between like my exam, like my basically my like classes and everything being done, and then having to hand in like then like having to start some test. There was like a period of like 10 days when like I probably should have been studying, but I didn't feel like I really needed to study. But I had like a couple like a week or so, I had like 10 days to kill, I remember distinctly. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I could just come up with an idea for a movie and write a whole movie in 10 days. And I like mathed out like, you know, what would be this many pages a day. And I what I ended up doing was I came up with this Dirk Dirksen versus Team Mars idea. And I like hammered out like from like 0 to 100, I hammered out a feature length screenplay. Now it was mostly a disaster, but you know, I just kind of did it as a fun, weird, stupid thing. But there was enough of of like interesting stuff in there and enough good jokes there that I kind of it just kept coming back to me, you know, over the years. And I kept thinking, I'd like to do something with this, you know, and I've got like a bunch of these notes basically. Like it was a feature script, it was really a bunch of notes. And then it was when I finally like settled on this thing, like it like trying it as a comic, whatever. And what I thought was interesting about it was yeah, like I was just really just literally going through like this 120 pages of like a script and just trying to think of like, well, what's the funny jokes? Like what are the funniest jokes I could pull out of it, you know? Um, and so I think like a lot of the anthology, I was surprised how much of it for, you know, of course, like the Dirksens, like people getting murdered by demons and, you know, slaughtering demons and so on and so forth. But a lot of the anthology is kind of like that, I think, whereas it has like this really grim, dark content, but even like the, I forget the name of a song, but the one that is kind of the laundrymen connected thing that Lynn and Steven did.
Law of Nature.
Yeah, Law of Nature. So that story is like it's got this really kind of dark, disturbing, like vampire, you know, werewolf kind of thing going on. But and it's, you know, very gritty even for like vampires and werewolves, you know.
Yeah.
But it still has like a real kind of like there's almost like a fun like joke to it too, you know, like the vampires like calling him a dog and you like they're chasing him through the desert, you know, like there's just a real uh I don't know what the word would be, but like I just feel like there's a real I was surprised when I read the anthology because I read some of these pieces in isolation. I was surprised like when I actually read them again and then read the newer stuff, like just how much fun it was. Like even stuff that like the Tomorrow's Escape is like literally this guy getting like crap knocked out of him as he
Yeah.
tries to like escape a concentration camp basically or prisoner of war camp. And it's like it's still sort of fun in a weird sort of way, you know.
Sure. I love that you brought up that Dirk Dirksen was originally a script because I was having a conversation the other day with Jordan Patrick Finn where we were talking about old Italian 70s horror films.
Oh yeah,
and I
sure.
was talking about how like I tend to lean more to atmospheric horror and like more about the mood and stuff like that. But what I really like about the old horror films is the cinematography, and like you have a cool image that hints at something else. And I really think that translates really well to comics. Right?
Oh yeah, sure.
You're basically taking little pieces of a storyboard to tell a different story.
What I've been saying like lately is I feel like, there's the big often people ask me when I teach creative writing, they ask me things like, well, what's the how do you, if you got an idea like for a story, say, how do you know whether it should be a like a novel or a movie or a poem or whatever? If you just got an idea, how do you figure out what to do it in? And there's an easy answer to that. I mean, so like one, it kind of gets into a lot of, the real answer is complicated because it gets into like, well, what do you want? Do you want to be a poet? If not, why are you writing poems? but like it gets into like these practical and career things, and also just your artistic, what thing do you want to do as an artist? But I think like the simple answer to it, which still has a bit of a complexity to it, is like, well, what's the conflict or the tension that's in that idea? Like the best conflict and tension, because all other things being equal, if there's really not a plot, but it's just, if there's just an idea tension, it tends to work best in a poem. If there's a character who's internally conflicted, and that's the sort of the overriding conflict, it tends to work best in prose. If there's conflict between two individuals, like a social conflict, that tends to work best on the stage. And if there's like an external like conflict, like some external monster like is barreling down, or like there's a bomb's about to go off and kill everyone because if the bus stops going below 60 kilometers an hour or whatever, like that's more of a movie. That external conflict like works best in a movie and the cinema. And in comics, I've been thinking a lot about, well, what is comics? Like what's the conflict that kind of is natural to the form in that sense? And the more I think about it, the more I think it's like just an actual metaformal conflict, like big versus small, like in Justin Curry, one of the people in this anthology. He's always drawing like big versus small, like these massive, monstrous, mechs, and then like fighting a little tiny girl or something, and like
David and
I feel like, or like green versus red, like some sort of like visual formal thing where you don't even need a story, but like just like shapes that kind of like black and versus white, like I feel like that kind of something that lends itself to that sort of as you say, like just a cool image that has its own sort of tension as an image. And then you start to string like a development of that tension, image wise, like to me, like is the best thing that works best in comics.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I like it how you can take something that you may think is a cool image, but it's telling part of a bigger story. And then by putting it in sequence, even without words, you can communicate something.
Yeah, I always think of Justin's like visual art and kind of how he'll draw. He'll draw his stuff, and when him and Gregory work together, I know like they'll often like come up with like ideas together and stuff. But there's a level at which like Justin's drawing a bunch of stuff, and then later they put some words on it. Even if they've come up with a story together, there's like that stage where he's like working, Gregory's like working with finished images, more or less, after maybe they've done some design work on the story together. Like because Justin's style is so narrative, like even when he does a single panel and it's not comics, like he's just doing one print, it just suggests so much about like what happened to, especially because his machines are all broken, right, half the time. And so it's like it just suggests so much about like what happened before, what's going to happen next, when he puts an image together. He's got a real narrative or storytelling sense. And of course, once he starts to string them together in a comic, and all these artists are really, I think, have like a good sense of story in that way.
Yeah,
and
they're all very good visual storytellers. Yeah, some are.
Yeah,
but they're all very good visual storytellers.
Mhm.
And I mean, I feel that you could be a good illustrator, but you may not be a good storyteller. I think it's possible.
Sure. Yeah, I think
But
so.
I do think it takes work to be a good visual storyteller. And I think we're pretty fortunate to have so many of them in this anthology.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with how it turned out and how even like thinking, oh well, these are good people, or cool stories. Like I even so like I feel like it kind of became a bit more than I was even expecting it to, which I attribute a lot to you actually, and kind of that sequencing and that arrangement and the selection of it. I think that's it's a really important part of an anthology, as you say. Like when you look at different anthologies, you can see, you know, it's very rare to me that, especially a comics anthology, like doesn't feel bloated. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Mm-hmm. Like just put everything in there in the kitchen sink too.
Yeah, I feel like so many of, I don't know why I feel that way, but it just is a feeling I get with a lot of anthologies, that they kind of, um, like we're doing a pretty sizable anthology, but I think a lot of them just feel too much like they're depending on size as a selling point than like some sort of consistency or flow.
Sure. I also think that we got fortunate in the sense that a lot of the stuff that people were working on, like the 1-pagers or the 4, the 6, or the 8, all of it falls in genre. So like even though this anthology doesn't have a theme, like we're not doing memoir comics or nonfiction comics or
Or even vampire
so,
comics, or like a narrow theme you'll see
or
anthologies
like a narrow
circle
theme
around.
too, right?
Yeah.
So like it's general, but it's still, I think it's tight enough that when you look at it, you're like, oh, this is enough. Like it isn't bloated, but it's kind of also on theme, even though it doesn't actually have a theme.
Yeah, I was surprised at how it felt more consistent than it was, and I maybe that's just accidental, because it's a small enough group of people and working in different arrangements that maybe there's just a consistency that develops that way. And maybe part of the consistency also, I think, is having you arranging it, as opposed to having no editor, right? And we're just all kind of collectively deciding how it goes.
Sure.
And I think also, but I almost feel like, I wonder, like if it's almost, we've got a movement on our hands in some sort of way, like is there
Okay, what do you
something,
mean?
like is there something like it just, I don't know what I mean, I guess, but I wonder, like looking at it, I've been thinking about this lately, like I wonder if it's almost like it almost kind of feels like the beginning of something. So we'll see, I guess. But like it just feels like, there's a good little group here that's doing a lot of things. And I just know behind the scenes, from what I know talking to people, like, like there's like some, people
There's more
are
stuff
starting
coming.
to land series, right? There's more stuff coming. There's like,
Yeah.
publishing deals kind of going on behind the scenes. I know of a bunch of books that are coming out that I won't talk about because they're not my book necessarily, right?
Sure.
That are, and they all, and some of them connect to some of the stuff in Dead Work, and and so I feel like I kind of wonder if it's like, I'm curious to know how this anthology looks in 10 years, and like what whether it's going to end up representing like a snapshot of some interesting moment or not. Time will
I
tell, I
think,
suppose.
well, even 10 years from now, I think it will still, we'll look back on it fondly, and it will be a snapshot of a time where everyone was feeling productive and creative, and everyone was working together, and all these comics that I relate to, like the Land of Misfit Toys, found a home and became this launching pad for other series and things that we can't talk about yet. So yeah, it's an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to some more from the Dead Work group myself. I gotta admit, I always feel, as a writer in comics, I always feel kind of like a bit of, even if I'm inside of it, I'm kind of feel like a bit of an outsider, because like so much of it is, the artist doing work and me just waiting around.
Sure.
And I always feel like it's always so surprising to me, like what they come up with. Maybe I've just been lucky with the people I've been working with, or just seeing this little group here. But
Well,
I've
it's the
rarely.
good kind of peer pressure, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's
you
good.
see all these like, and it's like healthy competition, but it's also like everyone is everybody's cheerleader, right? It's
Yeah,
not
it's
like,
rare actually, because I've been in other like productive like scenes, let's put
mhm.
it that way. um and they're not always like that.
No, they're not. Right? I've from my own experience, I've seen a few that are either very competitive and kind of in an unhealthy way, and everything's a competition, and you know, people have to do better than other people, and it's like just focus on doing the work and creating your work. And at least with this group, it's really nice because everybody is there to like give advice to one another, help one another, collaborate with one another. And if someone's landing a series, everyone's cheering for them. They're not like, you know, feeling defeated or, you know, talking behind that person's back. Like everyone is just super supportive, and it's refreshing,
Yeah, it really
honestly.
is refreshing, especially, I mean, again, like having experience with that kind of thing in other areas where maybe, there's a bit more of the other stuff going on. Sometimes it feels like not lately with what I've been doing these days, but like I just, can think in the past where like I've been part of a literary scene that was really hopping, and there was like
Mm-hmm.
some great stuff, and there was like this other side. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And I think for this, it's not so much of like we're a collective to see what other people can do for us, right? But kind of like how can we all work for each other? Do you know what I mean? You know, like when
Yeah.
sometimes people like start making connections and be like, oh, you know, like I'm gonna try and connect with this person because I want to advance my career, or, you know, what can this person do for me? I don't get that from this collective, right? It's just like, hey, you're creating something great. Hey, do you want to create something together? That would be fun. And I think it's led to, at least for me in my creative path, to me, it doesn't matter if someone is emerging or professional. Are you a good person? Right.
Yeah.
Do I want to work with you?
I
Right. On
really
that
feel
sense.
I've had a lot of conversations with Gregory Kamichik along these lines because I remember him saying to me something along the lines of like as he gets older, it becomes less and less. It becomes more and more for him about like who is it that I'll be working with, and do I want to work with that person? And whereas like when he was younger, he maybe would worry more about like, oh, is this going to be a good thing or for me to do career wise? Or he might worry like, is it going to make money? Or he might like just, digging his heels about a particular thing he liked about it, like, and wanted to kind of, feel control of or whatever. Maybe I'm putting words in his mouth, but I remember him saying to me something along the lines of like, as I kind of, get it more established and kind of get like further into it and meet and he was saying something like, it starts to be more and more about like, well, do I want to like talk to this person, you know, every,
Yeah.
like, forget about like whether we're making any money or something. Like, is it good to talk to this guy, or is he like, is it, do I dread every time I see his email in my inbox, and becoming more about those, like, are those relationships, like feeding you your energy levels or depleting them?
I love how you touch on that, because I think when we look at this collective, like I've worked with you a little bit, I've worked with Lyndon a little bit. I haven't really worked with a lot of the other guys until this anthology, but a lot of it was just we like being around each other. There's common interests. There's some people have their individual interests, and like we're learning about that, and that's exciting. But it's enjoyable, and I think that comes through in the collaborations and the work that's being created. So I think that goes back to tying into where you said like this seems fun, is because for us it is fun. It's just a group of friends getting together and creating things that they like to create.
Yeah, and I've been I feel like I've been feeling really privileged that to kind of be part of this little group here, and it's just like cool that it's kind of developed in the way it has, and not only that, but now we've got something to show for it, in this anthology, which of course, if you're listening to this before March 4th, we still need your help to kind of realize. So please, if you're listening, take a look at deadwork.ca and check out the Dead Work Anthology. Consider kickstarting it, or at least telling your friends, who are more comics minded about it. And again, if it's after March 4th, you can still go to deadwork.ca and check out, what's going on next with Dead Work, the Dead Work Collective. Adam, do you have any kind of last words or parting words to say about? I was going to make a pun on last words and Dead Work, but I couldn't think of a good way to connect it, without seeming too dire. But do you have any parting words on the Dead Work and kind of what you think of this project?
My initial reaction was to say no, but for the sake for the sake of this podcast, I would say that I think the anthology is the first step to something bigger. That you're if you are a fan of these creators, there's work in here that is going to be work in series later that maybe new readers will enjoy and fall in love with and want to go back. So it's very exciting because this may be the only one that we do.
Yeah, it may end up being a collector's issue if some of these series take off and all of a sudden Adam's too famous to work with the rest of us anymore.
Not me, but I know people who are booked for a year and a half already after this. Yeah. So it may be a long time before another one, or there may not be another one. So best jump on it.
Well, thanks, Adam. And to everyone listening, check out deadwork.ca and keep writing the wrong way.